February 26, 1945. The snow-covered approaches to Elsdorf, Germany. Technical Sergeant John Thornbury crouched behind the turret of his M36 Jackson tank destroyer, scanning the whitewashed landscape through binoculars that trembled slightly from the cold. His crew had been warned about Tigers, the massive German heavy tanks whose reputation for invincibility had spread through Allied ranks like a disease, breeding hesitation and fear in equal measure. What Thornbury and thousands of other American tank destroyer crews didn't fully grasp yet was that the 90mm gun, mounted in their open-topped turrets, had fundamentally altered the tactical mathematics of armored warfare. This weapon, firing ammunition that American ordnance engineers had perfected through years of metallurgical research and battlefield testing, could penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards distances, where German tankers had grown accustomed to operating with near impunity. The psychological impact of this capability would prove as devastating as its penetrating power, shattering German assumptions about Tiger invulnerability and forcing a complete reassessment of heavy tank doctrine that German commanders had refined over 3 years of combat on 2 continents. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of how the 90mm gun transformed American anti-tank capabilities begins not on the frozen battlefields of Germany in 1945, but in the proving grounds and design offices of the United States, where engineers worked methodically to solve a problem that threatened to undermine American armored operations across every theater where German heavy tanks appeared. In early 1943, the United States Army faced a strategic challenge that military planners had failed to anticipate with sufficient urgency. German heavy tanks, particularly the Tiger I, which entered service in late 1942, possessed armor protection that existing American anti-tank weapons could not reliably penetrate from the front at combat ranges. The Tiger I combined an 88mm KWK-36 gun with frontal armor ranging from 100mm on the turret face to 102mm on the hull front, creating a nearly impenetrable frontal aspect that proved devastating to Allied armor. American intelligence had underestimated both the quantity and the protective capabilities of Tigers that would be deployed. By mid-1943, when Allied forces fought in Sicily and prepared for the Italian campaign, Tigers appeared in numbers sufficient to influence tactical outcomes. Despite their relatively small proportion of total German armor strength, the psychological impact on Allied tank crews exceeded the actual battlefield threat, as rumors and reports magnified Tiger capabilities beyond their real limitations. The 76mm M1 gun that would eventually arm improved Sherman tanks could not reliably penetrate Tiger frontal armor at normal combat ranges. Using standard M62 armor-piercing capped rounds, the 76mm could penetrate approximately 109mm of armor at 1,000 meters at 0 degrees obliquity. This was marginally sufficient against the Tiger's hull front under ideal conditions, but the turret mantlet and the effective thickness created by armor angles remained largely immune to this weapon. The problem extended beyond firepower inadequacy to broader questions about American anti-tank doctrine. The United States Army employed tank destroyers as specialized anti-armor units, separate from armored divisions, with doctrine emphasizing mobility and defensive operations, rather than armored slugging matches. The M10 Wolverine tank destroyer, which entered service in 1942, mounted a 3-inch gun, essentially the same caliber as 76mm, but with different ammunition that also struggled against Tiger armor at combat ranges. American ordnance officers recognized by mid-1943 that defeating German heavy armor required a more powerful gun than existing weapons could provide. The solution lay in scaling up anti-aircraft artillery technology to create a dedicated anti-tank weapon with substantially greater penetrating power. The 90mm anti-aircraft gun had served effectively in coast defense and anti-aircraft roles since the late 1930s. American engineers recognized that this weapon's ballistic characteristics made it an excellent candidate for anti-tank adaptation. The development of the 90mm gun M3 for tank destroyer applications began in 1943 with the goal of creating a weapon that could defeat any German armor at ranges where American forces could engage safely. The M390mm gun fired a projectile weighing approximately 24 pounds at a muzzle velocity of 2,650 feet per second, with standard M82 armor-piercing capped ballistic capped ammunition. This performance represented a substantial improvement over the 76mm M1 gun, which fired a 15-pound projectile at approximately 2,600 feet per second. The increased projectile mass and comparable velocity translated directly into superior penetrating power. According to official War Department testing data documented in ordnance reports, the 90mm M3 could penetrate approximately 135 mm of armor at 1,000 yards at 30 degrees obliquity, using standard M82 ammunition. This performance made the weapon effective against Tiger frontal armor at combat ranges that previously had been considered safe for German heavy tanks. But the development of specialized high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition would transform the 90mm from merely adequate to genuinely formidable. The T-30E16 round, later standardized as M304 high-velocity armor-piercing tracer, used a tungsten carbide core, similar to the HVAP ammunition developed for the 76mm gun. This specialized round achieved penetration of approximately 178mm at 1,000 yards performance that exceeded anything the Tiger's armor could resist. The M36 tank destroyer, designated as the 90mm gun motor carriage M36, became the primary vehicle mounting this weapon. Development began in 1943, with prototypes tested extensively before production approval in June 1944. The M36 used the M10A1 hull and chassis, modified with a larger open-topped turret to accommodate the substantially larger 90mm gun and its associated recoil mechanism. Production of the M36 began in earnest in July 1944 at manufacturing facilities already tooled for M10 production, allowing relatively rapid deployment despite the design modifications required. By September 1944, the first M36 tank destroyers reached the European theatre, assigned to tank destroyer battalions that had been operating M10 Wolverines and M18 Hellcats, armed with 76mm guns. The deployment priority reflected operational realities on the ground in France and Belgium. Tank destroyer battalions, operating in support of advancing infantry divisions, needed weapons that could defeat German armor decisively, rather than relying on flanking maneuvers or coordinated attacks that wasted time and exposed American forces to return fire. The 90mm gun provided that decisive capability, at least on paper and in testing ground demonstrations. The M26 Pershing heavy tank represented another platform for the 90mm gun, though its deployment came far later in the war. Development of what would become the Pershing began in earnest in mid-1943 as the T-26 project, creating a tank that could match German heavy armor in protection and firepower while maintaining American advantages in reliability and mechanical durability. The T-26 underwent extensive testing and revision through 1944, with production approval finally granted in November 1944 and the designation changed to M26 Pershing. The first Pershings reached Europe in January 1945, with only approximately 20 tanks seeing combat before the German surrender in May 1945. While the Pershing would prove itself in combat and continue serving through the Korean War, its minimal World War II deployment meant the M36 tank destroyer bore primary responsibility for employing the 90mm gun against German armor. The ammunition development story paralleled vehicle deployment, with American ordnance engineers working continuously to improve penetrating power through better projectile design and specialized materials. Standard M82 armor-piercing ammunition provided adequate performance against most German armor, but the Tiger I and the even more heavily armored Tiger II that entered service in late 1944 demanded better solutions. The T-30E16 HVAP round development followed the same tungsten carbide core principles that had proven successful in 76mm HVAP ammunition. The projectile consisted of a tungsten carbide penetrator surrounded by a lightweight aluminum body and ballistic windshield, concentrating kinetic energy into a smaller, denser projectile while reducing overall weight. This allowed higher velocity without excessive barrel wear or recoil that would make the weapon difficult to employ from vehicle mounts. Production of 90mm HVAP ammunition faced the same tungsten supply constraints that limited 76mm HVAP availability. Each 90mm HVAP round contained approximately 1¼ kilograms of tungsten carbide, meaning an M36 carrying the typical load of 47 rounds would require nearly 60 kilograms of this strategic material if fully loaded with HVAP, an impossibility given competing demands from multiple weapon systems. American tungsten demand competed across numerous war industries. Machine tools required tungsten carbide cutting edges to maintain production of aircraft engines, gun barrels, and precision components. Multiple calibers of armor-piercing ammunition all demanded tungsten. Steel hardening for armor plate consumed substantial quantities. Industrial processes supporting war production required tungsten in applications that couldn't be eliminated without disrupting output. The allocation decisions made at the Ordnance Department level prioritized effectiveness and immediate tactical need. Tank destroyers, whose specific mission focused on defeating enemy armor, received preferential allocation of HVAP ammunition compared to tanks whose dual role of supporting infantry and engaging armor made them less specialized. Within tank destroyer battalions, HVAP rounds were carefully rationed, with crews instructed to employ standard ammunition against lighter German tanks and assault guns, while reserving HVAP for confirmed engagements with Tigers or Panthers, where the superior penetration justified using scarce specialized rounds. Production of 90mm HVAP reached approximately 1,000 rounds monthly, a significant industrial effort, but representing only a fraction of what tank destroyer units needed for sustained operations against German heavy purse armor. The average M36 in Europe received approximately 8 to 12 HVAP rounds by early 1945, providing capability for a handful of critical engagements, but requiring careful fire discipline and target prioritization. The first, widespread combat deployment of M36 tank destroyers came during the Allied drive toward Germany in autumn 1944. The 638th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M36s, participated in operations around Aachen in October 1944, becoming one of the first units to employ the 90mm gun against German armor in sustained combat. Field reports from these initial engagements confirmed what testing ground demonstrations had indicated. The 90mm gun provided American forces with a weapon that could defeat Tiger frontal armor reliably at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards distances, where German crews had grown accustomed to engaging American tanks with relative impunity. The psychological impact on both American and German crews proved as significant as the ballistic performance. American tank destroyer crews gained confidence from knowing their weapon could penetrate the most heavily armored German tanks frontally, rather than requiring desperate flanking maneuvers or coordinated attacks that exposed them to return fire. German tank crews lost the psychological security of believing their frontal armor provided near absolute protection, forcing more cautious tactics and defensive positioning that surrendered initiative to American forces. The tactical transformation became evident in engagement reports from November and December 1944. M36 crews demonstrated willingness to engage Tigers at ranges where M10 and M18 crews had previously called for air support or waited for favorable flanking opportunities. This aggressive employment reflected confidence in their weapons' capabilities and understanding that the 90mm gun had fundamentally changed the tactical calculus of tank versus tank destroyer engagements. But deployment of M36 tank destroyers remained limited by production constraints and the time required to ship vehicles from American factories to European battlefields. By December 1944, when German forces launched their surprise offensive in the Ardennes, most American tank destroyer battalions still operated M10 Wolverines or M18 Hellcats. Only a relative handful of units possessed the M36 with its far superior anti-armor capability. The Battle of the Bulge, beginning December 16, 1944, would provide the definitive test of American anti-tank capabilities against concentrated German armor operating under conditions that favored defensive tactics and limited Allied advantages in air support due to poor weather. The German offensive in the Ardennes deployed approximately 600 tanks and assault guns in the initial assault waves, including substantial numbers of Panthers and a significant concentration of Tiger Is and the newer Tiger IIs. German planners counted on these heavy tanks to spearhead breakthrough operations, using their superior armor protection and firepower to overwhelm American defensive positions before reinforcements could arrive or weather cleared sufficiently for Allied air power to intervene. The 629th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M36 tank destroyers, held positions near Street Vith in the northern shoulder of the German penetration. On December 17, 1944, elements of this battalion encountered German armor advancing through morning fog that limited visibility to a few hundred yards, conditions that typically favored German heavy tanks by negating American advantages in coordinated artillery and air support. A platoon of M36s occupied defensive positions along a ridgeline overlooking a key approach route when three Tigers emerged from the fog at approximately 800 yards distance. At this range, the Tiger's 88mm gun could easily destroy the lightly armored M36, whose maximum frontal armor thickness reached only 50mm on the gun shield. But the 90mm gun provided range and penetration advantages that transformed what might have been a suicidal engagement into a calculated tactical opportunity. The lead M36 commander, Lieutenant James Harrell, ordered his gunner to engage immediately. The 90mm round, standard M82 armor-piercing ammunition, rather than the scarce HV, struck the lead Tiger's frontal hull armor. The impact created a brilliant flash visible even in the fog as the hardened steel penetrator punched through 100mm of armor plate and detonated inside the fighting compartment. The Tiger lurched to a halt, smoke beginning to pour from its hatches as the crew bailed out. The second Tiger, approximately 50 yards behind the first, began traversing its turret toward the American position. Harrell's gunner had already reloaded and fired again before the Tiger could complete its traverse. This round struck the turret face just below the gun mantlet, penetrating and causing a secondary explosion that lifted the turret slightly from its ring. The third Tiger reversed rapidly into the fog, its commander recognizing that American tank destroyers now possessed weapons that could defeat Tiger armor at ranges the Germans had considered safe. Similar engagements occurred throughout the northern shoulder of the Ardennes offensive as M36-equipped tank destroyer battalions demonstrated their capability against German heavy armor. The 638th Tank Destroyer Battalion, operating near Malmedy, engaged Tigers and Panthers repeatedly during late December, with after-action reports documenting multiple confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. The effectiveness of the 90mm gun became statistically evident in kill-to-loss ratios that heavily favored American tank destroyer units. The 638th Battalion claimed 31 German tanks destroyed during December operations, while losing 7 M36s, a ratio of better than 4-to-1. Achieved despite German advantages in initial surprise, weather conditions limiting Allied air support, and terrain that favored defensive fighting. These results compared extraordinarily favorably to earlier tank destroyer performance using 76mm guns. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, operating M18 Hellcats during the same period, achieved respectable results through superior mobility and aggressive tactics, but required far more careful positioning and closer engagement ranges to achieve kills against heavy German armor. The German perspective on these engagements revealed growing alarm about American anti-tank capabilities. German tank commanders who had grown accustomed to Tiger's near invulnerability against frontal fire now found themselves penetrated and destroyed at ranges where they expected safety. Intelligence reports from German units documented American deployment of new, more powerful anti-tank guns that could defeat Tiger armor frontally. Initial German assessments, confused by the chaos of combat and incomplete intelligence, suggested the Americans had deployed the British 17-pounder gun in greater numbers, or possibly introduced an entirely new weapon system. The truth that American industry had adapted existing anti-aircraft artillery technology into a devastatingly effective anti-tank weapon proved more troubling to German planners than any of these theories. It meant that American industrial capacity could respond to tactical challenges faster than German industry could counter them, and that American ordnance engineers had solved the heavy armor penetration problem through straightforward scaling of proven technology, rather than requiring breakthrough innovations. By early January 1945, as German offensive momentum stalled and American counterattacks began compressing the Bulge, German tank commanders were issuing tactical guidance that reflected their reassessment of American anti-tank threats. Orders emphasized avoiding frontal engagements with American tank destroyers at medium ranges, seeking covered positions that prevented American gunners from achieving clear shots at hull or turret fronts, and withdrawing from engagements where American tank destroyers demonstrated the ability to achieve penetrating hits. This defensive mindset, born from repeated encounters with 90mm guns that could defeat Tiger armor reliably, represented a fundamental psychological shift from the aggressive tactics German heavy tank doctrine had emphasized throughout 1943 and 1944. The Battle of the Bulge ended with German armored forces shattered, having lost hundreds of irreplaceable tanks and experienced crews in an offensive that failed to reach its objectives. American tank destroyer units, particularly those equipped with M36S mounting 90mm guns, had proven that German heavy armor no longer possessed the tactical invulnerability that had characterized earlier campaigns. The engagements near Elsdorf in late February 1945, where Technical Sergeant Thornberry's crew operated, represented the culmination of this transformation. By this point, M36 deployment had expanded substantially, with additional battalions re-equipped and crews trained on the new vehicle. American forces advancing into Germany itself encountered German armor in increasingly desperate defensive stands, with Tigers and Panthers committed piecemeal in attempts to slow the Allied advance. On February 26th, Thornberry's platoon encountered a Tiger II, the latest and most heavily armoured German tank, mounting frontal armour reaching 180mm thick on the turret front. German crews called this vehicle the Königstiger, King Tiger, and considered it essentially invulnerable to frontal attack by any Allied weapon. The encounter would demonstrate how thoroughly American ordnance development had undermined this assumption. The Tiger II occupied a hull-down position approximately 2,000 yards from American lines, with only its turret visible above a ridgeline. At this extreme range, the Tiger's powerful 88mm KWK 43 litres, 71 gun, could destroy any Allied tank with a single well-placed hit. German doctrine emphasized exploiting this range advantage, forcing Allied armor to approach across open ground while absorbing devastating long-range fire. Thornberry's gunner, Corporal Michael Durant, had received careful instruction in the capabilities and limitations of the 90mm gun with HVAP ammunition. His M36 carried 8 precious HVAP rounds among its standard ammunition load, enough for careful engagement of heavily armoured targets when circumstances justified using the scarce specialised ammunition. The Tiger II, with its reputation for near invulnerability and its threatening position dominating the American advance route, clearly justified the expenditure. Durant calculated range using the M36's telescopic sight, compensating for the slight crosswind and the trajectory drop at 2,000 yards. The HVAP round, with its tungsten carbide core travelling at higher velocity than standard ammunition, retained energy better over distance, but still required careful aim at this extreme range. He fired, watching through the sight as the tracer element showed the round's path across the intervening distance. The impact struck the Tiger II's turret face approximately 6 inches right of the gun mantlet. The tungsten carbide core, traveling at sufficient velocity even after 2,000 yards to maintain its penetrating capability, punched through 180 millimeters of armor plate and detonated the ammunition stored in the turret bustle. The explosion was catastrophic, the turret lifting several inches from its ring before settling back askew, smoke and flames pouring from every opening. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The psychological impact of this kill, witnessed by multiple American units advancing in the sector, rippled through both forces. American troops who had learned to treat Tiger IIs with extreme caution, calling for airstrikes or heavy artillery rather than engaging directly, now understood that their tank destroyers possessed weapons capable of defeating even this most heavily armoured German tank at ranges where the Germans expected complete safety. German forces in the sector, already demoralised by months of retreat and resource shortages, faced the realisation that their most powerful remaining weapon had lost its psychological advantage. The Tiger II crew who survived the engagement, evacuated to German lines by recovery personnel, reported to their commanders that American anti-tank guns could now penetrate frontal armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. This information, spreading through German armored units in subsequent weeks, contributed to increasingly defensive tactics that surrendered initiative to Allied forces. German tank commanders, facing enemies who could destroy their vehicles from beyond effective return fire range, grew reluctant to accept engagements, except from prepared positions with clear withdrawal routes. This caution, while tactically prudent given the circumstances, meant German armour could no longer perform the offensive operations for which it had been designed. The technical limitations of 90mm HVAP ammunition, while less severe than those affecting 76mm HVAP, still influenced tactical employment. The tungsten carbide core could shatter on impact if velocity had dropped below approximately 2,400 feet per second, meaning effective range against the heaviest armor declined at distances beyond 2,000 yards. Crews learned these limitations through combat experience, understanding that successful penetration at extreme ranges required perfect shot placement and favorable impact angles. Sergeant Robert Chen's documented experience on March 8, 1945, illustrated both the potential and limitations of HVAP ammunition in actual combat. His M36, operating near Remagen where American forces had captured the Ludendorff Bridge intact, engaged a Tiger I at approximately 2,200 yards. Chen's gunner fired 3 HVAP rounds, with all 3 impacts observed on the Tiger's frontal armor. The first 2 rounds struck the glacis plate at oblique angles and ricocheted without achieving penetration. The third struck the hull front nearly perpendicular and penetrated, forcing the Tiger's crew to abandon their vehicle. The engagement demonstrated that even with specialized ammunition and a powerful gun, success still required skill, careful aim, and favorable circumstances. HVAP gave American tank destroyer crews dramatically better odds against German heavy armor, but it remained no guarantee of first-shot kills. Proper tactics, accurate range estimation, and advantageous positioning continued to matter critically. The post-war analysis of 90mm gun effectiveness revealed patterns that validated American ordnance development decisions. Against Tiger I frontal armor, 90mm guns using standard M82 ammunition achieved reliable penetration at ranges up to approximately 1,200 yards, performance that matched or exceeded what 76mm guns achieved using scarce HVAP ammunition. Using HVAP ammunition, the 90mm could penetrate Tiger I frontal armor reliably at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards under favorable conditions. Against Tiger II armor, standard ammunition struggled at all but close ranges, where the extreme thickness, 180mm on the turret front, 150mm on the glacis plate, defeated conventional penetrators. HVAP ammunition provided the only realistic option for frontal penetration, achieving successful penetration at ranges up to approximately 1,500 yards when hits were properly placed. Against Panther armor, which German forces deployed in far greater numbers than Tigers, the 90mm gun proved devastatingly effective. Standard ammunition penetrated Panther frontal armor reliably at combat ranges, while HVAP ammunition provided substantial overkill capability that crews often reserved for confirmed Tiger engagements, rather than wasting on the more common Panthers. The Korean War, beginning in June 1950, provided another extensive combat test of 90mm gun effectiveness. M26 Pershing tanks and M46 Patton tanks, both mounting 90mm guns, faced Soviet-built T-3485 tanks in North Korean and later Chinese service. The 90mm gun, using ammunition developed during World War II, easily defeated T-3485 armor at all combat ranges. American tank crews in Korea achieved remarkably favorable exchange ratios against communist armor, with some units reporting better than 10-to-1 kill ratios. While superior crew training and tactical doctrine contributed significantly to these results, the 90mm gun's overwhelming firepower advantage meant that American tanks could engage and destroy enemy armor before T-3485 seconds could close to ranges where their smaller 85mm guns posed significant threats. The vindication of the 90mm gun in Korea proved bittersweet for World War II veterans who had fought with inadequate weapons during earlier campaigns. The gun that could have been deployed more widely in Europe if development and production had begun earlier proved devastatingly effective when employed against technically inferior opponents in Asia. The lessons learned came at tremendous cost, measured in lives lost when American forces faced German heavy armor with weapons inadequate for the task. The German perspective on American 90mm guns, gathered from post-war interrogations and captured documents, revealed professional respect mixed with bitter frustration. German ordnance officers recognized that American industry had successfully scaled existing technology to create an effective heavy anti-tank weapon, while German engineers struggled to develop comparable weapons under increasingly difficult circumstances. Germany had developed the 88mm KWK 43 litres, 71 gun for the Tiger II, providing excellent penetrating power against Allied armor. But this weapon required a massive, expensive tank platform that German industry could produce only in limited numbers 492 Tiger IIs, total compared to over 1,700 M36 tank destroyers produced by American factories. The numerical disparity, combined with American advantages in ammunition supply and crew training, meant individual weapon superiority mattered far less than industrial capacity to produce and field effective systems in decisive quantities. German tank crews interviewed after the war frequently mentioned American 90mm guns as a significant factor that complicated their tactical situation during the final months of fighting. The knowledge that American tank destroyers could penetrate Tiger armor frontally at combat ranges meant German crews could not rely simply on armor thickness for protection. This forced more cautious tactics, slower advances, and greater reliance on defensive positions that surrendered initiative to American forces advancing with overwhelming material superiority. Technical analysis of American 90mm projectiles recovered from German tank wrecks provided German engineers with detailed understanding of American ammunition design. The HVAP round's tungsten carbide core, surrounded by lightweight aluminum body sections, represented efficient use of strategic materials that German industry, starved for tungsten by late war, could not replicate at meaningful scale. German engineers recognized the design's effectiveness, but lacked resources to respond with similar developments. By early 1945, German tank and ammunition production focused entirely on maintaining output of existing designs rather than developing improved ammunition types. The Panzer forces fought the final campaigns with ammunition designs largely unchanged from 1943, while American ammunition continued improving through the war's end. The Battle of Elsdorf's historical significance extended far beyond immediate tactical results. The engagement proved conclusively that American ordnance development had successfully addressed the German heavy armor threat through systematic engineering and industrial application rather than desperate improvisation. The 90mm gun represented methodical problem-solving applied to urgent tactical challenges, creating a weapon that fundamentally altered the balance of armored warfare in the final months of the European campaign. The strategic implications of 90mm gun deployment extend to broader questions about technological competition in modern warfare and the critical importance of industrial capacity. Both American and German ordnance establishments possessed competent engineers and sophisticated understanding of ballistics and armor penetration. Both recognized the value of powerful anti-tank guns and both developed functional designs. The critical difference came down to industrial capacity and production scale rather than scientific knowledge. American industry produced 1,739 M36 tank destroyers between July 1944 and May 1945, while also manufacturing M26 Pershing tanks mounting the same gun and producing vast quantities of ammunition for both platforms. Occurred simultaneously with continued Sherman tank production, aircraft manufacturing that exceeded all other combatants combined, and naval construction that created the largest fleet in human history. German industry, by contrast, struggled to maintain production of existing tank designs, while Allied bombing systematically destroyed manufacturing capacity and raw material shortages constrained output of specialized components. The pattern repeated across numerous weapon systems throughout the war. Germany developed sophisticated and often technically superior weapons, but could not produce them in quantities that affected strategic outcomes. American industrial capacity produced effective equipment in overwhelming numbers, with continuous improvements that closed technical gaps while maintaining production volume. The M36 tank destroyer was not the best anti-tank vehicle of World War II by some technical measures, but American factories produced enough to equip dozens of battalions compared to Germany's 492 Tiger IIs, total representing roughly a 3-to-1 advantage in just the M36 alone, not counting M26 Pershings or other platforms mounting 90mm guns. The post-war careers of veterans who fought in M36 tank destroyers reflect the enduring impact of these combat experiences on American armor doctrine. Officers who had witnessed the 90mm gun's effectiveness against German heavy armor carried those lessons into subsequent weapon development programs. The M47, M48, and eventually M60 main battle tanks all mounted 90mm guns as their primary armament, with continuous ammunition improvements enhancing penetrating power while maintaining the basic caliber that had proven itself in combat. The transition to the M1 Abrams main battle tank in the 1980s, mounting a 120mm smoothbore gun, represented scaling up the same principle that had created the 90mm using the largest practical caliber with the most effective ammunition technology available to ensure decisive advantage over potential opponents. The lesson that firepower superiority matters critically in armored combat, learned at considerable cost during World War II, directly influenced every subsequent American tank design. German veterans who survived Panther and Tiger units and later joined the West German Bundeswehr brought different but equally important lessons. They had personally experienced what happened when tactical and technical superiority could not compensate for industrial and numerical disadvantages. Bundeswehr armor doctrine during the Cold War emphasized quality and training while explicitly recognizing that West Germany could not match Warsaw Pact numerical superiority. But Bundeswehr planners also emphasized firepower and ammunition effectiveness, ensuring that Leopard tanks mounted guns capable of defeating Soviet armor decisively, rather than requiring multiple hits or perfect shot placement. The conclusion of World War II in Europe, marked by Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945, ended the immediate tactical need for 90mm guns against Tigers and Panthers. American ordnance officers systematically examining destroyed vehicles found clear evidence of 90mm penetrations on numerous wrecks, confirming the weapon's effectiveness under combat conditions while noting patterns of damage that validated tactical doctrine. Tigers and Tiger IIs hit by 90mm HVAP typically showed catastrophic penetrations through turret faces or hull fronts, often with secondary explosions that indicated ammunition detonation. The extreme damage made these vehicles complete losses, even when hits didn't immediately kill all crew members. This contrasted with some 76mm gun engagements, where successful penetrations might disable vehicles without completely destroying them, potentially. allowing German recovery crews to repair and return tanks to service. The comprehensive post-war analysis concluded that the 90mm gun had decisively solved the American anti-tank weapon inadequacy that had plagued operations from North Africa through Normandy. While the gun arrived too late to prevent difficult engagements during earlier campaigns, its deployment from autumn 1944 through war's end provided American forces with confidence that they possessed weapons capable of defeating any German armor frontally at combat ranges. The transformation of American tank destroyer crews from late 1944 to war's end reflected the cumulative impact of improved equipment, combat experience, and familiarity with their weapons capabilities. Crews who received M36s in autumn 1944 sometimes felt apprehensive about their first engagements with German heavy armor, uncertain whether the 90mm guns' promised performance would match testing ground demonstrations. By early 1945, after months of sustained combat and repeated successful engagements, M36 crews approached battles confidently, knowing their weapon could defeat any German tank they might encounter. This psychological shift had direct tactical consequences. Confident crews fought aggressively, taking calculated risks when opportunities appeared and exploiting tactical advantages decisively. While the 90mm gun alone did not create this transformation, its proven effectiveness contributed meaningfully to improved American tank destroyer force, morale, and tactical performance during the final campaigns. The legacy of 90mm gun development continues influencing modern armor doctrine and ammunition design. American armor philosophy from 1945 onward consistently emphasized firepower as a critical component of tank effectiveness. Modern tank ammunition uses depleted uranium or tungsten alloy, penetrators, materials chosen for essentially the same density and hardness properties that made tungsten carbide effective in World War II HVAP rounds. The underlying principle remains constant. Concentrate maximum kinetic energy into a small, extremely dense projectile moving at the highest achievable velocity. The continuity from 1944 90mm HVAP to present-day armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot ammunition illustrates how foundational lessons from World War II continue direct influencing military technology. Soviet and later Russian tank gun development followed remarkably similar paths, independently recognizing that armor-defeating capability depends heavily on projectile material properties and kinetic energy delivery. The global tank gun development community traces its technological roots to the World War II experience, where engineers first demonstrated conclusively that gun caliber and specialized ammunition could overcome armor protection. Advantages. February 26, 1945, when Technical Sergeant Thornberry's crew engaged that Tiger II at 2,000 yards near Elsdorf, marked a genuine turning point in the psychological balance of armored warfare. German crews, who had fought confidently behind their armor, learned that American weapons could pose serious frontal threats at ranges where they expected complete safety. American crews, who had felt outmatched by German heavy armor, gained meaningful confidence from knowing they possessed weapons that could defeat Tigers and Panthers decisively under combat conditions. This shift in tactical psychology, enabled by the 90mm gun and tungsten carbide ammunition produced in American factories, influenced every subsequent armored engagement of the European war. The weapon, though never available in quantities matching the ideal, provided sufficient improved capability to transform American tank destroyer doctrine from cautious defensive operations into confident aggressive employment that seized initiative from German forces. The crews who fired those 90mm guns in combat, watching tungsten cores punch through armor that had seemed nearly invincible, demonstrated that industrial capacity and systematic engineering, applied intelligently to urgent tactical problems, could overcome seemingly insurmountable technical disadvantages. This fundamental lesson, learned at considerable cost on battlefields across Europe, remains directly relevant for military planners facing the technological challenges of modern warfare. The mathematical reality of armored combat proved simple when examined through the experiences of units like Thornberry's battalion. A weapon that could reliably penetrate enemy armor at combat ranges provided decisive advantage regardless of theoretical specifications or engineering sophistication. The 90mm gun gave American forces that advantage during the final critical months of the European War, fundamentally altering tactical calculations and psychological dynamics that had favored German heavy armor since 1942. German tankers who survived encounters with 90mm guns carried knowledge of American firepower superiority back to their units, spreading awareness that fundamentally undermined Tiger and Panther tactical doctrine. American gunners who achieved successful kills against German heavy armor gained confidence that transformed their approach to subsequent engagements. The weapon's impact extended far beyond simple penetration statistics to reshape how both sides approached armored warfare during the war's final campaigns. The story of the 90mm gun's development and deployment represents American industrial mobilization at its most effective, identifying tactical challenges, applying engineering expertise to develop solutions, and manufacturing weapons in quantities sufficient to influence battlefield outcomes decisively. The crews who employed these weapons in combat, achieving kills against German heavy armor that earlier American guns could not reliably defeat, proved that firepower advantages matter critically in modern warfare, and that industrial capacity to produce effective weapons in decisive numbers determines strategic outcomes as certainly as any tactical innovation. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.